And in continuation, does Jesus associate with the disinherited, coming from Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited? This is a continuation. Howard Thurman goes on to say, and this is part 4, I believe it's part 4. If I'm incorrect, please excuse me. Howard Thurman goes on to say that when I was a youngster, this was drilled into me by my grandmother. The idea was given to her by a certain slave minister who on occasion held secret religious meetings with his fellow slaves. And he goes on to say how everything in me quivered with the pulsating tremor of raw energy when in her recital she would come to the triumphant climax of the minister. You are not niggers. You are not slaves. You are God's children. This established for them the ground of personal dignity. And that is so important when you are encouraging those who feel less fortunate or the disinherited. He says this established for them the ground of personal dignity, that you are a child of God, so that a profound sense of personal worth could absorb the fear reaction. This alone is not enough, but without it, nothing else is of value. The first task is to get the self immunized against the most radical results of the threat of violence. Those persons who are slaves, our ancestors. When this is accomplished, relaxation takes the place of churning fear. The individual now feels that he counts, that he belongs. He senses the confirmation of his roots, and even death becomes a little thing. All leaders of men have recognized the significance of this need for a sense of belonging among those who feel themselves disadvantaged. Several years ago, Howard Thurman goes on to say, I was talking with a young German woman who had escaped from the Nazis, first to Holland, then France, England, and finally to America. He goes on to say, she described for me the powerful magnet that Hitler was to German youth. The youth had lost their sense of belonging, but they did not count. There was no center of hope for their marginal egos. According to my friend, Hitler told them, no one loves you, I love you. No one will give you work, I will give you work. No one wants you, I want you. And when they saw the sunlight in his eyes, they dropped their tools and followed him. He stabilized the ego of the German youth and put it within their power to overcome their sense of inferiority. It is true that the hands of a man like Hitler, power is exploded. Power is exploded and turned to ends which make for havoc and misery. But this should not cause us to ignore the basic soundness of the theory upon which he operated. A man's conviction that he is God's child automatically tends to exploit. I'm sorry, I said exploit. It should have been exploited. It says a man's conviction that he is God's child automatically tends to shift the basis of his relationship with all of his fellows. He recognizes at once that to fear man, or whatever may be that man's power over him, is a basic denial of the integrity of his very life. It lifts that mere man to a place of preeminence that belongs to God and to God alone. He who fears is literally delivered to destruction. To the child of God, this is very important, A scale of values becomes available by which men are measured and their true significance determined. Even the threat of violence, with the possibility of death that it carries, is recognized for what it is, merely the threat of violence with a death potential. Such a man recognizes that death cannot possibly be the worst thing in the world. There are some things that are worse than death. To deny one's own integrity and personality in the presence of the human challenge is one of those things. He goes on to say, "Be not afraid for them that kill the body, and after that have no more than they can do," says Jesus. One of the practical results of following this new orientation is the ability to make an objective, detached appraisal of other people, particularly one's antagonists. Such an appraisal protects one from inaccurate and exaggerated estimations of another person's significance. In a conversation with Lincoln Steffens, one said that he was sure he could rear a child who was a member of a minority group or who was aptitude of a ghetto so as to immunize him against the corroding effects of such limitations. He said, "I would teach him that he must never call another man great, but that he must always qualify the term with the limiting phrase as to of the Greek language. A man is never great in general, but he may be great as to something in particular." He goes on to say, "Let me give you an illustration. Once I was the house guest in Berlin of one of the world's greatest scientists. During the first few days of my sojourn, I was completely disorganized. I was nervous, tended to be inarticulate, generally confused, and ill at ease. I had either to get a hold on myself or bring my visage abruptly to an end. One morning, while shaving, it occurred to me that despite my profound limitations of knowledge in physics and mathematics, I knew infinitely more about politics than did my host. At breakfast, I found my tongue and my dignity, and the basis of equality between us was at once restored. My host was a great man as to his particular field of natural science, while I was competent in the field of contemporary politics and affairs. This awareness gave me my perspective. The illustration anticipates the second basic question that must be answered by the disinherited. What am I? The question has to do not with a sense of innate belonging, but rather with personal achievement and ability. All of the inner conflicts or frustrations growing out of limitations of opportunity become dramatically focused here. Even though a man is convinced of his infinite worth as a child of God, this may not in itself give him the opportunity for self-realization and fulfillment that his spirit demands. Even though he may no longer feel himself threatened by violence, the fact remains that for him, doors are often closed, and that is so true. There are vocational opportunities that are denied him. It is obvious that the individual must reckon with the external facts of his environment, especially those that constrict his freedom. There is something more to be said about the inner equipment growing out of the great affirmation of Jesus that a man is a child of God. If a man's ego has been stabilized, resulting in a sure grounding of his sense of personal worth and dignity, then he is in a position to appraise his own intrinsic powers, gifts, talents, as well as his ability. He no longer views his equipment through the darkened lenses of those who are largely responsible for his social predicament. He can think of himself with some sense of detachment from the shackles of his immediate world. He says that if he equips himself in terms of training in this mode, his real ability is brought into play. The fact that he is denied opportunity will not necessarily deter him. He will postpone defeat until defeat itself closes in upon him. The interesting fact is that defeat may not close in upon him. Curious indeed is the notion that plays hide and seek with his human life. I may be an exception. A large measure of illusions and self-deception is implicit in this notion, but again and again it has come to the rescue of desperate people forced to take desperate chances. The psychological effect on the individual of the conviction that he is a child of God gives a note of integrity to whatever he does. It provides character in the sense of sure knowledge and effective performance. After all, this is what we mean by character when applied to ability in action. When a man is sick and calls a doctor, what he wants most to know about the doctor is not the make of his automobile, or whether he obeys traffic signals, or what church he attends, or how many children he has, or if he is married. What is most critical about the doctor so far as a sick man is concerned is, can he practice medicine? Now, what we are discussing has profound bearing upon the kind of assurance and guidance that should be given to children who seem destined to develop a sense of defeat and frustration. The doom of the children is the greatest tragedy of the disinherited. The doom of the children is the greatest tragedy of the disinherited. They are robbed of much careless rapture and spontaneous joy of merely being alive. Through their environment, they are plunged into the midst of overwhelming pressures for which they can be no possible preparation. So many tender, joyous things in them are nipped and killed without their ever knowing the true nature of their loss. The normal for them is the abnormal. Youth is a time of soaring hopes, when dreams are given first wings, and as reconnoitering birds explore unknown landscapes. Again and again, a man full of years is merely the corporation of the dreams of his youth, the sense of fancy growing out of the sense of fact, which makes all healthy personalities and gives a touch of romance and glory to all of life, first appears as the unrestricted imaginings of youth. But the child of the disinherited is likely to live a heavy life. A ceiling is placed on his dreaming by the counsel of despair coming from his elders, whom experience has taught to expect little and to hope for less. If, on the other hand, the elders understand in their own experiences and lives the tremendous insight of Jesus, it is possible for them to share their enthusiasm with their children. This is the qualitative overtone springing from the depths of religious insight, and it is contagious. It will put into the hands of the child the key for unlocking the door of his hopes. It must never be forgotten that human beings can be conditioned in favor of the positive as well as the negative, which is so true. A great and central assurance will cause parents to condition their children to high endeavors and great aspiring, and these in turn will put the child out of the immediate clawing reaches of the tense or the sustained negations of his environment. I have seen it happen in communities that were completely barren with no apparent growing edges, without any point to provide light for the disadvantaged. I have seen children grow up without fear, with quiet dignity and such high purpose that the mark which they set for themselves has even been transcended. The charge that such thinking is merely rationalized cannot be made with easy or accepted grace by the man of basic advantage. It excuse me, it ill behooves the man who is not forced to live in a ghetto to tell those who must how to transcend its limitation. The awareness that a man is a child of God, of religion, who at one and at the same time the God of life, creates a profound faith in the life that nothing can destroy. Nothing less than a great daring in the face of overwhelming odds can achieve the inner security in which fear cannot possibly survive. It is true that a man cannot be serene unless he possesses something about which to be serene. Here we teach the high watermark of the prophetic religion, and it is of the essence of the religion of Jesus of Nazareth. Of course, God cares for the grass of the field, which lives a day and is no more, or the sparrow that falls unnoticed by the wayside. He also holds the stars in their appointed places, leaves his mark in every living thing, and he cares for me. To be assured of this becomes the answer to the threat of violence, yea, to violence itself. To the degree to which a man knows this, he is unconquerable from within and without. To know the power of Jesus Christ, to know that you are a child of God, should bring about a dignity in all of us, that we are children of God. When I was very small boy, he says, Halley's Comet visited our solar system. For a long time, I did not see the giant in the sky because I was not permitted to remain up after sundown. My chums had seen it and had told me perfectly amazing things about it. Also, I had heard of what were called comet pills. The theory was that if the pills were taken according to direction, then when the tail of the comet struck the earth, one would not be consumed. One night I was awakened by my mother, who told me to dress quickly and come with her out into the backyard to see the comet. I shall never forget it if I live forever. My mother stood with me, her hand resting on my shoulder, while I, in utter speechless awe, beheld the great spectacle with its fan of light spreading across the heavens. The silence was like the absolute motion. Finally, after what seemed to me an intermediate time interval, I found my speech. With bated breath, I said, "What will happen to us if that comet falls out of the sky?" My mother's silence was so long that I looked from the comet to her face, and there I beheld something in her countenance that I had seen only once before. But when I came into the room and found her in prayer, when she spoke, she said, "Nothing will happen to us, Howard. God will take care of us." Over simple-hearted mother of mine, in one glorious moment, you put your heart on the ultimate affirmation of the human spirit. Many things have I seen since that night, times without number. I have learned that life is hard as crucible steel. But as the years have unfolded, the majestic power of my mother's glowing words has come back again and again, beating out its rhythmic chant in my own spirit. Here are the faith in the awareness that overcome fear and transform it into the power to strive, to achieve, and not to yield. Then chapter 3, deception. Deception is perhaps the oldest of all of the techniques by which the weak have protected themselves against the strong, which is deception. Through the ages, at all stages of syntenic activity, the weak have survived by fooling the strong. The techniques of deception seem to be a part of the nervous reflex action of the organism. The cuttlefish, when attacked, will release some of the fluid from its spinal bag, making the water all around him murky. In the midst of the cloudy water, he confuses his attacker and makes his escape. Almost any hunter of birds has seen the mother stimulate a broken wing so as to attract attention to herself and thereby save the life of her young. As a boy, I have seen the shadow of the hawk on the grassy meadow where I lay resting underneath a shade tree. Consider the behavior of the birds a few feet away as they see the shadow. I have seen them take little feet full of dry grass or leaves, turn an easy half somersault, and play dead. The hawk blinks his eyes, thinks he has had an optical illusion, and goes on to find birds that do not know enough to pretend to be dead. We often play a game of hide and seek in which the refrain was lay low, slick duck, hawks around. Natural selection has finally resulted in giving to various animals neutral colors or blending colors so that they fade into the landscape and thus protect themselves from the destruction by deceiving the enemy. All little children well know this technique. They know that they cannot cope with the parental will on equal terms. Therefore, in order to carry on their own purposes, they work all kinds of simple and not so simple schemes for making the parents do the children's will as if it were their own, until the teacher catches on. It is a favorite device of students. When a particular lesson has not been studied, or there is danger that the teacher will cover territory that extends beyond the day's preparation, some apparently innocent question is asked about the teacher's prejudice, pet interest, or particular concern. Once the teacher is discussing that particular point, there is nothing more to fear, for before he comes to the end of his talk, the bell will ring and all will be saved. It is an ancient device that a man-dominated social order has forced upon women, even down to latest times. Oliver Schreiner spent much of her energy attacking this form of deception by which the moral life of women was bound. Much of the constant agitation for an equal rights amendment to the Constitution grows out of recognition of the morally degrading aspect of deception and dishonesty that entered into the relationship between men and women. It says, when the children of Israel were in captivity in Babylon, it was the prophet Ezekiel could not give words of comfort and guidance by direct and overt statement. If he had, he would not have lasted very long, and the result would have been a great loss to his people and a tightening of the bonds that held them. He would have been executed as a revolutionary in short order, and all religious freedom would have been curtailed. What did the prophet do? He restored to a form of deception. He put words in the mouth of an old king of of Tyre that did not come from him at all, but from Nebuchadnezzar. It was Nebuchadnezzar who had said, I am a god. He used what we would call now double talk, but the Jews understood, even though the Babylonian secret service was helpless because he was not openly talking against the state. In a certain southern city, a blind Negro had been killed by a policeman. Feeling ran very high. The Negroes were not permitted to have any kind of eulogy or sermon at the funeral service. There was fear of rioting. Nevertheless, the funeral was held with policemen very much in evidence. There was no sermon, but there was a central prayer. In the prayer, the minister told God all that he would have said to the people had he not been under very rigid surveillance. The police could do nothing, for the minister was not addressing the people. He was talking to his God. How tragically sordid, but it is the old method by which the weak had survived through the years. One of the oldest of the Negro spirituals deals quite interestingly with the technique. The setting is very dramatic. The slave had often heard the master's minister talk about heaven, the final abode of the righteous. Naturally, the master regarded himself as fitting into the category. On the other hand, the slave knew that he too was going to heaven. He reasoned, there must be two heavens. No, this cannot be true, because there is only one God. God cannot possibly be divided in this way. I have it. I am having my hell now. When I die, I shall have my heaven. The master's having his heaven now. When he dies, he will have his hell. The next day, chopping cotton beneath the torrid skies, the slave said to his mate, I got shoes, you got shoes, all God's children got shoes. When we get to heaven, we're going to put on our shoes and shout all over God's heaven, heaven, heaven. Then looking up to the big house where the master lived, he said, everybody's talking about heaven, ain't going there. Instances could be multiplied from all over the world and from as far back in human history as records have been kept. It is an old defense of the weak against the strong. We're going to stop right there, and we'll pick up in my next video. God bless you. Thank you for joining. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm on all social media platforms, Reverend Anthony Owens. Reverend Anthony Owens Ministries, or Reverend Anthony Owens Ministries .info for info. God bless you. May God keep you. Thank you so much for viewing our ministry video on my website by way of YouTube. Please join us every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. where we will tackle questions concerning life in general from a Christian point of view. Please follow us on all social media platforms. Facebook, I have a Facebook group under Reverend Anthony Owens Ministries, and same on Twitter as well as Instagram. You can find us. You also can go to my website, Reverend Anthony Owens .info for info, and you will see information pertaining to our ministry. I pray that you will share my ministry website with your friends, your enemies, and your foes. We are answering questions that many of us have concerning life from a Christian point of view. I thank you for joining us. We will be here every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. to dialogue. I'll be chatting online, and so I pray that you will join us. Thank you so much for watching our ministry video, and may God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. God bless.